Well, the background is that for a number of years I've specialised in the history and theology of Christian-Muslim relations. My specialism is the Arabic texts from the Middle Ages, and I've always been wondering about how these fit into the wider history, wider context of relations between Christians and Muslims. I notice in those texts that there are various arguments used, various stories and examples used that continue to appear in the later Middle Ages, in the early modern period, and in the modern period itself. And one of the questions that has always been in the back of my mind is, how do these stories get transmitted from one author to another? And I suppose, if anything, it was that curiosity, that question, that started off as a kind of initial notion of the project. It started off the project, and without really thinking too hard about it, I conceived this project to trace the history of Christian-Muslim relations throughout the entire world in the period 600, when the Prophet Muhammad was still a youngish man and he hadn't yet declared himself a prophet, up to 1914, the beginning of the 20th century. And it's as simple as that. The project entails discovering all the works, whether extant or not, all the works that are known of, written by Christians and Muslims against one another and about one another, and also works not explicitly written with the other in mind, all the works that contain significant information about the other faith, showing what authors knew, the attitudes that authors had towards the other faith.
Okay, thank you. So what are the aims of this project? What are you really trying to achieve via it?
One aim is to provide a resource for researchers. There will be researchers who will know Latin, but will not know Arabic or Greek, maybe. In the outcome of the project, which is a series of volumes, you can see them, the red volumes behind me. We've got to volume 18 so far. In the volumes are articles, we call them entries, on the individual works, and those entries contain descriptions of the structure of the work, the main contents of the work, and specifically the main contents that show what the work contains about Christian-Muslim relations, and also an attempt to state their significance so that anybody reading them will say, this is a work that is worth knowing about. Well, the project hasn't finished yet, so we've got a few years to go, so it would be a little bit preliminary to talk about conclusions. But I suppose our conclusions are likely to be that there has been a sustained tradition among Christians and Muslims wherever they have met, whether in the Middle East, in the Arab heartlands, whether in Spain, in the Middle Ages, whether in parts of Europe and Africa, whether in other parts of the world, Southeast Asia, South Africa, South Asia, there has been a sustained tradition of Muslims and Christians meeting, and very often meeting in competition, meeting in debate, meeting in opposition, to try to show that the other faith has got deficiencies to it. That is probably the main the main conclusion that we will come to, which is a little bit depressing, I suppose. Well, given the number of texts we have, it's very, very difficult to do that. I mean, I have recently been looking at certain treaties that were made between monasteries, Christian monasteries, and Muslim farmers in the south of Spain in the Middle Ages. And that shows a relationship that is one of practicalities, based on financial interests, actually. And it just shows people getting on and living together. And you find a great number of texts reflecting that reality of living together, nearly always under Muslim rule. But I suppose if there's one text that stays in my mind, it's by an Arab-speaking Christian bishop probably in the early 13th century, somewhere around the year 1200. And since I'm interested in argumentation, this is a text that really does stay in my mind, because this bishop, he knows the Quran very well indeed, and in his work he uses the Quran to support Christian teachings, Christian beliefs and doctrines. He does it in a very cheeky way. He's very selective in the verses from the Quran that he uses, and every now and again he actually changes the wording to suit his purposes. And I find that, probably from a literary point of view, extremely intriguing indeed.